Most people spend their entire lives believing they know themselves. But Carl Jung said the most dangerous part of your personality is what you've never truly seen. Beneath your identity, morality, and the mask you show the world, another version is hidden. And that hidden version controls your life more than you think. Jung called this the shadow. It's made of emotions, desires, insecurities, fantasies, instincts, and impulses you suppressed for societal acceptance. Your anger, jealousy, selfishness, envy, hidden rage, dark fantasies, fear of weakness, all are suppressed in the unconscious mind. But the terrifying truth is, the shadow doesn't disappear just because you ignore it. In fact, the more you suppress it, the more power it gains over your behavior. Those who appear most perfect on the outside are often the most consumed by chaos within. That's why some people suddenly explode after years of silence. Some become addicted to destruction, and some destroy relationships they desperately wanted to save. The shadow always finds its expression. Jung believed that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Understand this carefully. Perhaps your self-destruction isn't random. Perhaps your toxic relationships aren't accidents. Perhaps anxiety, emptiness, and that constant feeling that something is broken within you. These are all the result of a hidden war within your psyche. Modern society doesn't teach people to understand darkness, only to hide it. You are rewarded for appearing calm, obedient, emotionally controlled, and socially acceptable. But darkness never leaves. It waits, it observes, it grows stronger in silence. And eventually, the person you pretend to be becomes weaker than the hidden person inside. This video is not about embracing negativity or evil. It's about confronting the part you were taught to fear. Because the biggest threat to your future isn't the world, but your unconscious self living in darkness. Part 1. What the shadow really is. The shadow isn't just your bad side, and this is the first misunderstanding. Jung believed human beings aren't divided into simple categories like good and evil. The human psyche is far more complex, and the shadow is created when parts of your authentic self are rejected, hidden, or denied. Imagine a child taught from childhood that anger is unacceptable. Whenever they show frustration, they are punished or shamed. Slowly, they stop expressing anger outwardly, but anger doesn't disappear. It sinks into the unconscious mind. Years later, as an adult, they consider themselves calm and peaceful. Then one day, they explode over a small matter and don't understand why. This is the expression of the shadow. Similarly, sadness, confidence, sexuality, ambition, vulnerability, and creativity can also be suppressed. Many people suppress positive traits too, because they were taught they were dangerous, arrogant, selfish, or embarrassing. A man mocked for confidence might remain insecure his whole life. A woman punished for emotion might become detached. The shadow is essentially the graveyard of the self. It contains all the parts society labeled unacceptable. And the more you disconnect from it, the more fragmented your personality becomes. That's why people project their darkness onto others. Qualities you irrationally hate in others often reveal your hidden truths. The person constantly accusing others of selfishness might secretly be selfish themselves. One who condemns weakness might be terrified of their own. Jung said projection is a clear sign of an active shadow. Human beings rarely see reality clearly because they constantly filter the world through unconscious material they don't acknowledge. That's why people become addicted to creating enemies. Hating darkness in others is easier than facing it within oneself, but avoiding the shadow comes at a cost. Repressed emotions transform into resentment, bitterness, addiction, self-sabotage, manipulation, emotional numbness, and psychological exhaustion. The shadow grows stronger every time you pretend it doesn't exist, and eventually, The mask you built to survive becomes a prison from which you cannot escape. Part 2. How society creates the shadow. No one is born hating themselves. The shadow begins to form the moment a child realizes that love is conditional. In childhood, we learn which emotions make people uncomfortable and which behaviors earn approval. If a child is praised only for obedience, they learn to suppress rebellion. If shamed for crying, they suppress vulnerability. If honesty is punished, they learn to hide the truth behind a performance. Slowly, the authentic self begins to split. One version becomes socially acceptable and the other is buried underground. This is how the shadow is born. Society doesn't teach people to understand darkness, only to hide it. Social media has made the situation worse because modern identity is now based on performance. Everyone wants to appear successful, emotionally stable, attractive, confident, spiritual, intelligent, and morally superior. But behind the performance is exhaustion. People are becoming strangers to themselves because they spend more time managing appearances and less time understanding their inner world. Jung believed this disconnection creates psychological imbalance. The faker the outer personality, the more aggressive the shadow underneath. That's why those who publicly preach morality sometimes turn out to be secretly corrupt. Those who appear emotionally perfect internally collapse. The shadow feeds on repression, and modern culture constantly rewards repression. Men are taught to suppress weakness, but not emotional integration. Women are taught to suppress vulnerability in the name of independence, while internally craving emotional safety. Everyone is optimizing their image instead of understanding humanity. The result is a fragmented society where people try to escape themselves. Entertainment becomes a distraction. Addiction becomes a coping mechanism. Relationships become emotional transactions. And slowly, people disconnect from reality. The most frightening part is that many live their entire lives through a false identity built only to avoid pain. Jung warned that what remains unconscious will eventually control you. Suppressed anger becomes passive aggression. Denied fear becomes anxiety. Insecurity transforms into arrogance. Loneliness becomes emotional dependency. The shadow doesn't disappear by being ignored. It just waits for the right moment to take control. Part 3. When the shadow takes over. Most people imagine evil as something dramatic, obvious, and external, but Jung believed the greatest danger comes from ordinary people who remain unconscious of their own darkness. The shadow does not always appear as violence or cruelty. Sometimes it appears as addiction, manipulation, obsession, or jealousy, emotional dependency, or the quiet destruction of your own potential. A person can spend years believing they are kind, while secretly controlling others through guilt. Someone can believe they are morally superior while being driven entirely by envy and resentment. The terrifying thing about the shadow is that it often disguises itself as virtue. Jung understood that human beings are capable of unbelievable self-deception. This is why some people sabotage every relationship they enter. They consciously desire love, but unconsciously fear intimacy. Because intimacy threatens the protective mask they built around themselves, so the shadow creates chaos instead. Arguments appear out of nowhere, trust collapses, emotional withdrawal begins, and eventually the relationship dies, not because love was impossible, but because the unconscious was stronger than awareness. The same pattern appears in ambition. Many people dream of success, while unconsciously fearing judgment, failure, rejection, or responsibility. So they procrastinate, self-sabotage, and remain trapped in cycles they claim to hate. Jung believed unconscious fear was one of the strongest forces shaping human behavior. And when ignored long enough, the shadow begins acting independently. This is when people say things like, "I don't know what came over me after destructive behavior." That phrase itself reveals unconscious possession. The person was no longer acting consciously. The shadow had temporarily taken control. This is why repression is dangerous. Suppressed emotions do not disappear. They accumulate pressure. Eventually they explode through addiction, rage, breakdowns, or betrayal. Impulsive behavior or emotional collapse. And modern life creates perfect conditions for this because people are constantly distracted from self-reflection. Instead of confronting pain, they numb it. Instead of understanding themselves, they escape into stimulation. But the shadow cannot be escaped forever. Every ignored wound eventually demands attention. Every denied truth eventually resurfaces. And the longer you avoid yourself, the more destructive the unconscious becomes. Part 4. Integrating the shadow. But integration is not comfortable, and this is the part most people avoid for their entire lives. Because the moment you begin confronting your shadow honestly, your entire identity starts collapsing in front of you. The mask you spent years building suddenly feels fake. The personality you used to protect yourself no longer feels real. And the ego panics because it realizes control is slipping away. Jung understood that human beings are addicted to illusion. Because illusion feels safe, people would rather live with familiar suffering than face the terrifying freedom of truth. And this is why so many individuals stay trapped in emotional cycles that quietly destroy them, because pain becomes part of identity. The victim mentality becomes comfort. Emotional chaos becomes familiar, and the shadow keeps feeding itself through unconscious repetition. But real transformation begins the moment a person becomes willing to sit alone with themselves without distraction, without performance, without external validation, because silence exposes everything. Suddenly you notice how much anger you carry, how much insecurity hides beneath confidence, how much fear exists beneath ambition, and how much loneliness hides behind the need to constantly be desired, admired, or needed by others. This is why modern people are terrified of stillness, because stillness forces confrontation with the unconscious. And Jung believed that the unconscious always reveals what the conscious mind tries hardest to escape, which means your addictions, obsessions, emotional triggers. Toxic attractions and destructive habits are not random weaknesses, but psychological messages trying to reveal hidden truths about yourself. The problem is that most people never decode the message. They simply numb the symptoms. They distract themselves with entertainment, relationships, ambition, social media, validation, substances, endless scrolling, meaningless conversations, or temporary pleasure, but none of these things heal the shadow. Because the shadow does not disappear through avoidance, it grows stronger, and eventually the unconscious begins shaping reality itself. This is why some people unconsciously destroy every good opportunity that enters their life, because deep down they do not believe they deserve peace. Others constantly chase emotionally unavailable partners because their psyche has become addicted to emotional suffering. Some sabotage success because failure feels psychologically safer than visibility. And many spend their entire lives performing a personality they secretly hate. Because they fear rejection more than emptiness, Jung believed this internal fragmentation is what creates psychological suffering. The human soul was never designed to be divided against itself, and the longer a person suppresses their authentic emotions, instincts, desires, and fears, the heavier the shadow becomes, until eventually it erupts through breakdowns, rage, depression, addiction, emotional numbness, or complete identity collapse. And this is why shadow integration is not about becoming darker, but becoming whole, because a person who understands their darkness becomes harder to manipulate, harder to control, and harder to break. They no longer need to pretend to be perfect. Because they have already confronted the imperfection within themselves, they stop projecting their wounds onto others. They stop demanding that relationships fill the emptiness inside them, and for the first time, they begin taking responsibility for the unconscious patterns shaping their lives. This is the painful truth most people never realize. Healing is not becoming someone new. Healing is returning to the parts of yourself you abandoned in order to survive. The confidence you buried, the vulnerability you suppressed, the anger you feared, the truth you silenced, the dreams you sacrificed for approval. Integration means reclaiming all of it consciously, and according to Carl Jung, this is the true path toward individuation. The process of becoming psychologically complete, because the goal of life is not to become pure light. The goal is to become aware enough that your darkness no longer controls you unconsciously, and once that happens, something powerful changes inside you. You stop seeking identity through other people. You stop chasing constant validation. You stop needing the world to tell you who you are, because your sense of self no longer depends on performance. And this is where real inner peace begins, not the fake positivity sold by modern culture, but the calm that comes from finally knowing yourself completely, both the light and the dark. And if there is one truth Jung tried to leave humanity with, it is this: the most dangerous person is not the one who has darkness within them. Every human being does. The most dangerous person is the one who refuses to see it. So if this video made you question yourself differently, subscribe to Sapientia, where psychology, philosophy, and the hidden truths of human nature are explored far beyond the surface. Because the deeper you understand the mind, the more clearly you begin to understand yourself.